I started as an inside sales rep at the New York Mets, and I was pounding out 120 dials every single day, slinging season tickets. We were terrible, and that really helped me form my abilities as a salesperson because selling a very easy ticket where there's a lot of supply and not a lot of demand, on top of selling something that is not only not a have to have, it's not even a nice to have, all manual. We had the phone, we had the headphones, you got to punch 9 to get out of, it was actually punch 9-1 to get out. And there were plenty of times where, you would punch 911 accidentally, and then you'd have like
Oh
an
boy.
internal freak out, like, no, I don't mean to call the police, and you'd have to hang up and do it all again. What I didn't really think about was doing 20 dials extra per day meant I was doing 100 extra per week, and that I was going to get a lot better than them a lot faster. So I was going to learn faster than they would. I'll pick up trash on the side of the street for a software company if they want. I just wanted a chance. And I kind of felt the same way that I did, when I was making 120 calls every single day. Like, I would keep a little notepad, and every time I got rejected, I would just put a little strike on there. I knew that, each no got me closer to a yes. I think a lot of people get caught up in what their title is, and title was just never important to me. Like, I didn't care. WalkMe could call me whatever they wanted. I just wanted the opportunity to learn. I really wanted to be in a room where I was not the smartest person there. And I really felt that at WalkMe, not only was I not the smartest person there, I wasn't close to the smartest person there. There are some things that you just can't teach, and both of those fall into that. I want to see somebody that is just willing to run through a wall, because in the SDR role, you kind of have to. You are going to get hit with so many walls, and you are going to have to find a way to generate pipeline anyway. I have evaluated about 16 different AI tools in the last 2 months that would fall into the AI SDR category. I left all 16 of those demos with fairly strong conviction that each of those tools is not ready for high utilization commercial use.
Welcome back to another episode of Prospecting Pros. Today on the show, we have Josh Roth. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
All right. So what I like to do with every guest is just get a little bit of background. How did you make it to where you are today? Give us a rundown of how you got your career started, some of the positions you've held, and where you currently are at in your career.
Sure. So I started as an inside sales rep at the New York Mets, and I was pounding out 120 dials every single day, slinging season tickets, and I got really lucky that I had a lot of really great colleagues and leaders at the Mets that taught me how to sell at a high level, taught me how to prospect on my own at a really high level. After the Mets, I wanted to shift into software and spent a few years in early stage software. And 2020 went over to WalkMe as a BDR manager. Then at LUD&x, I led the commercial sales team. So how we defined that was under 10 billion of revenue. And then at Pipefy, leading the global sales team, and have a fun announcement coming in a couple of weeks on where my next spot's going to be.
I want to jump back. First off, that's so cool. You got to call for a sports team. I grew up watching. I'm an A's fan, not the best franchise, but still grew up a big baseball fan. And just, I think out of college, I thought, okay, what could I do that I would be passionate about? And I ended up working in tennis, because that's what I played. I played college tennis and was a coach. But I can imagine you must have been a baseball player, and that somehow you landed there. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. I loved baseball. Was a huge fan, always wanted to work in baseball, and wanted to work on the baseball operations side, which I think a lot of, young kids want to do. And over time, I was kind of encouraged, hey, check out sales, that can be a really great way to start. And it was, selling for the Mets, particularly in the first 2 years I was there, was really difficult. We were terrible. And that really helped me form my abilities as a salesperson, because selling a very easy ticket where there's a lot of supply and not a lot of demand, on top of selling something that is not only not a have to have, it's not even a nice to have, it's like a super nice to have. I mean, it's discretionary. And so, that really required an ability and a willingness to perfect your craft as much as humanly possible, day in and day out. And making that many cold calls will certainly help you to do that.
So were you calling businesses to try to sell them on packages, or was it actual individuals?
It was a little bit of both. I think a lot of my colleagues probably felt more comfortable calling individuals because then you can talk about, how much they love the Mets and there's some familiarity there. I felt that the money was 99% of the time going to be on the business side. And so, I started calling businesses pretty early on in my career. I was calling pretty much every type of business, like scrap metal companies, restaurants. I was calling anybody I could until I started to more hone in on specific industries that were probably more within our ICP, had a little bit more, entertainment they were doing, whether it was of their own employees or of their, prospective or current customers. And that's really where I learned the ropes and started to understand the language that they were speaking, and over time learned to speak it back to them.
So at that job, was there any dialers at this point in time, or was it all manual dialing?
All manual. We had the phone, we had the headphones. You got to punch 9 to get out of. It was actually punch 9-1 to get out. And there were plenty of times where you would punch 911 accidentally, and then you'd have like
Oh
an
boy.
internal freak out, like, no, I don't mean to call the police, and you'd have to hang up and do it all again. So yeah, all manual.
And so what you're saying, you're knocking out a bunch of calls. What was that, like roughly 100? What was the quota?
So our quota was 80. So the way that I thought about it was, if the minimum dials per day was 80, I figured that the best people were going to do 100. And if I wanted to catch the best people and be better than them, I would need to do 120 because they'd already been doing it. So they had a head start on me. So I figured I would need to do 120 just to kind of keep pace with them. What I didn't really think about was doing 20 dials extra per day meant I was doing 100 extra per week, and that I was going to get a lot better than them a lot faster. So I was going to learn faster than they would. So for me, it was just about, how many more reps can I get on this? And that really helped me learn, helped me grow. And, just from a math perspective, doing 20 more dials than everyone else every single day gives me more, more shots on goal and more
Mhm.
chances to score.
For those of you listening, 100, or whatever what Josh is just saying, roughly 100 manual dials is a lot in one day. If you have done manually dialing, it's a full day of calling. Where today you have different dialers and you just hit start and it starts dialing for you. It's a full day's of work because I've done it. I had a similar commission only job, not in sports. It was like that. There was no quota, but it was like, you had to do a roughly 75 to 80 a day. And I was running my own demos on top of it and selling. So I had to do both. But it's like you could do the dials, and then you have a full day of demos. But if you didn't keep up because it was a one-time sale, then your pipeline dries up. So you knew you had to get those dials in again. Yeah, it was a never ending.
For me, I always felt that in the first, by 10 a.m., regardless of when I got into the office, by 10 a.m., I needed to be at 50 dials. By lunch, I needed to be somewhere between 70 and 80, depending on how heavy my afternoon I wanted it to be. I tried to get to about like 110 to 115 by about 2:30 to 3 o'clock, because then I figured the rest of the day from 3 o'clock to about 4:30 to 5, I would need to prospect, build my list for the next day, go back through who I called, call any follow-ups that I had. But then I would also try to get some dials out generally between like 4:30 and 5:30, because again, this was back when you could still call CXOs, even like a CEO or a president, and they would have EAs. They wouldn't have, voicemail boxes like they do today. And so that was a time for me to be able to hit some of the more executive level stakeholders that I was calling on. And similar to you, I was an inside sales rep. So I was selling, I was, our version of demos was what we called, like site visits, where people would come and like look at the seats. We'd give them a tour of the ballpark, let them go take some pictures on the field, take them into the clubhouse. But then I was also going out to other businesses to schedule, to book meetings, in typically Manhattan, but, I would go to Queens, sometimes all the way down to like New Jersey or Brooklyn. It was, it always depended. But, my goal was always to kind of get into that like 120 range, with about 2 hours to spare in the day, so that, any follow-ups that I had, or any like, oh, call me at the end of the day today's, I could hit that while prospecting for the next day.
So out of curiosity, do roles like this still exist in like the Mets organization, or are they pretty much full with season ticket holders at this point?
They definitely still exist. I mean, a lot of it will depend on how good the team is. So if you have a really good team like Dodgers, Boston Celtics, Oklahoma City Thunder, they've got pretty famous wait lists. I think the Green Bay Packers still have a wait list for their season ticket holders. So you will have some teams that have, just full season ticket holders, in which case their sales team will reflect that. They'll have more on the service side than the sales side. But if you have teams that have, pretty poor performing teams, you'll have pretty full sales teams, because they'll have to go outbound. You're going to need to go out to make sales, because if you just wait for people to come in, your revenues are going to lack. And in sports, it's kind of this triangle of, what are our sales going to be? Therefore, how much money can we pay the players? And then the third triangle is whatever players we pay for, how many wins are we going to get? And so each of these three kind of pieces of the triangle depend on one another. If you're going to generate, if the sales team is going to commit to generating $100 or $110 million of revenue, well, then you can spend $90 million on players, but that's going to need to generate about 90 wins, in order to then help the sales team out to get to that number. So, you kind of have these 3 points in the triangle, and it's an interesting equation to kind of play out. I was never in the room for those discussions. That typically occurred at the executive level, but I was close enough, and I was lucky enough to have really good managers and directors who, kind of gave us some clue as to what went on in those meetings. And it was an interesting learning process.
One thing that stuck out as you were talking, were at the Mets, and then you went to a next job, and you were I believe you said a BDR manager. So yeah. How did you land? Because a lot of people are SDRs or BDRs, and they're trying to get out of that to get into a management position. How did you land that?
This episode is sponsored by Level Up Leads, a B2B sales development and appointment setting agency. Companies always need pipeline, but they oftentimes don't want to hire SDRs internally. The whole process is risky and expensive. You've got hiring costs, onboarding, training, additional spend on your tech stack, a few months to ramp up. And with that being said, SDRs are a high turnover position, and the person you hire might not necessarily work out, so you need to start all over again. That's why companies outsource this. Level Up Leads allocates a team of people, their tech stack, so you can onboard and launch your campaigns in about a week. They set qualified meetings in your calendar so your team has more selling opportunities. Visit levelupleads.io today to learn more. All right, now back to the show.
So I did a couple of years as like the founding AE type of role in early stage software companies. I had maybe one or two AEs that would like report to me, but I was really more like a founding AE type of role, I think is what they would call it today. And I did that at two software companies, and both went out of business. One went out of business 8 months into my time there. The other went out of business 6 months into my time there. And it was actually quite difficult because a lot of people would look at my resume and say, oh, you have a hoppy resume. You just jump from job to job. And I'm like, I didn't want to leave, but I couldn't pay my rent with CarePoint equity. And when CarePoint was one of the early stage businesses I was at that went under, and the CEO had said, hey, if you continue to work, I'll give you 4 times or 5 times the equity in exchange for not making any salary. And I had said, I'm not going to be able to swing that because I have to pay my rent.
Yeah, it's not going to lead to anything.
Yeah, and so I jumped to a couple of places, and I was lucky enough to land kind of like a contract type of role at a company called MNet Health. MNet Health was a revenue cycle management, like RCM technology, and they were historically only service-based revenue cycle management, but they had built a technology to help them do that. And they were at 4 or 5 million of revenue when I started working there. They had a couple of AEs, and I worked as kind of an interim head of revenue, if you want to call it. And David Hamilton, the CEO, had given me a couple of mandates. He had said, hey, I want you to either help me get acquired by CareCredit, which is a division of Synchrony Bank, or by a private equity firm. And I want you to help us go from 5 million to 10 million, moving our revenue from all service-based to 50% software, 50% service. And, he and I joked that we went 3 out of 2. We went from 5 to 12 million. So we accomplished that. We partnered with CareCredit, and then SSM Partners acquired MNet Health, which is now being rolled into a couple of different companies. I think it's now called One MNet Health Services. And I always wanted to work in more of like growth stage software as opposed to early stage software. And I was interviewing with Gong and WalkMe, and both for SDR manager roles. I really thought I was going to get the Gong job. I had interviewed a couple of times. It went really well. And the recruiter had started to ask me kind of like the good questions, like, hey, when could you start? What salary are you expecting? And I was like, okay, like we've got some momentum here. And I went up for Gong's interview, and they had said, hey, you don't have the software experience necessary to take this job. And it was like soul crushing. I was so sad. On my dime, I'd paid to fly up to San Francisco to go interview at their office. I'd actually missed my flight back because the interview went overtime, and I thought it was going to be a really good thing for me. And then they called me on my way to the airport when I was in the process of missing my flight. And they had said, hey, we're going to respectfully decline you. You don't have enough experience in the software industry. And I was, as I said, like I was just crushed. And the next day I got up and I was like, I don't want to do anything. Like, I just want to sleep. I'm sad. I'm depressed. But I forced myself out of bed, and I was like, no. Like, I'm not going to do it this way. Like, I'm going to keep pushing. I'm going to keep trying. And I called the recruiter that put me up for the Gong job. And I was like, hey, is there like anything else that you have? Anything? Like, I'll pick up trash on the side of the street for a software company if they want. Like, is there anything you have? She's like, well, actually, my boss is friends with the director of business development at WalkMe. Let me see what I can do. And she put me in touch with WalkMe. The interview went great. I ended up getting the job there. And somewhere around here is a trophy. I never missed a quota at WalkMe. I was the top BDR manager there. I think my overall attainment in my career at WalkMe was like 134%, and ended up getting just a very serious job offer at LUD to be kind of the number 2 sales leader there, and eventually kind of moved into the number 1 spot, and led the sales team. And honestly, it was just, I just wanted a chance. And I kind of felt the same way that I did, when I was making 120 calls every single day. Like, I would keep a little notepad, and every time I got rejected, I would just put a little strike on there, because I knew that each no got me closer to a yes. Just kept interviewing, kept getting rejected, and it finally hit one with WalkMe.
So when you were there, how many reps, or whether it be SDRs or sales, or you call it AEs, were you managing?
It was just BDRs. It was about 20. It was probably like just under 20.
That's a lot.
I think my team was 1 manager, 16 reps, if I have that correct. It was a lot, as you said, because at this time, it was COVID. They're BDRs, so I know that they need a little bit more support. They need more coaching, more enablement than you would, managing an enterprise or strategic account executive. And so I put a huge amount of time into my time at WalkMe. Like, I was up at 6:30, 7 a.m. sometimes, just like coaching BDRs. I would work till 6, 7 o'clock at night, coaching BDRs that I didn't get to in the morning. My entire Monday, Tuesday was basically just one-on-ones with people, but we were doing some interesting stuff. We went from, I think WalkMe was maybe like 75 million when I got there. And when I left, we were like 225, 250, and I IPO'd, and it was really interesting to experience that. And I think that kind of made me a little thirsty for another public offering. And just being at WalkMe with all of these really incredible people was just such a learning experience. Like, I think a lot of people get caught up in what their title is, and title was just never important to me. Like, I didn't care. WalkMe could call me whatever they wanted. I just wanted the opportunity to learn. And for me, taking what others might perceive as a step back, for me was actually 2 steps forward, because I had the opportunity to listen to Shane Orlick, who was our CRO, in forecast calls, and listen to how he ran forecast calls, listen how Mark Richter, our VP, ran territory planning, listen to Elisa Rosenthal, how she ran her commercial sales team and how she enabled, the team, and everybody went on to do some really, really cool stuff. Like Shane was the president at Jasper. Elisa was the head of sales at OpenAI. And just the opportunity to surround myself with really smart people, was really important to me. And I really wanted to be in a room where I was not the smartest person there. And I really felt that at WalkMe, not only was I not the smartest person there, I wasn't close to the smartest person there. And that was really important to me, to surround myself with people that could help me really up-level myself.
Well, I think if you're the smartest person in the room, you need to be in a different room. What I'm trying to do here at Level Up is just surround myself with people that are better at all these little things. Little things, I mean different departments. So I don't know more than they do at the department, so I can lean on them. So I want to go back to, you mentioned managing the SDRs. It's not that easy. Like right now we have a roughly 40 in-house. It's a lot. So what are some suggestions you'd give to people about managing SDRs? Do you customize it a bit to the person, or do you focus more on the actual coaching, the one-on-ones? Like, how do you go about it in your ideal world?
It's interesting. I think that I would answer that question differently if you asked me 5 years ago than if you asked me today. 5 years ago, cold calling still worked. Cold emailing worked, but to a lesser degree. Now in 2025, you need a lot of technology to make those work. If you're going to have strong unit economics for your BDR SDR team, you're going to need a parallel dialer, like a couple of pieces of tech we mentioned earlier. If you're going to make email work, you're going to need a sales engagement platform. And that just wasn't the case when I led the BDRs. So I think first and foremost, recognizing that if you want a BDR SDR team to work, you are going to need to invest in more than just the personnel. Like, you are going to need a technology to surround that. I think that's number one. Number two,
real quick, I just want to jump in. Yeah. Also, someone who knows how to use the technology is very important, because you 100%. Could get it and then it's not used and then it becomes a big waste.
100%. Yeah. I mean, if you're just going to buy something that's going to ultimately be like shelfware, vaporware, it's not worth the investment. Like, you're going to need to make multiple investments. It's not just in the people, it's in the technology, it's in the adoption of the technology, all of it. I think secondly, what I would say is, as an SDR leader, I think it's important that you recognize that you're actually much more of a sales enablement leader than you are an SDR leader. As an SDR leader, you can, of course, put guardrails around the team in terms of how many calls you need to make, how many emails you need to make. What I see often happens with SDR leaders is they default to kind of this old-fashioned playbook of like 50 dials per day and X amount of emails per day and X amount of prospects added per day. But I think everybody's kind of coalesced around those numbers, but it's not about those numbers. It's about, what are your conversion rates and what do you think your conversion rates can be, in order for you to then determine how many cold calls you need to make and how many emails you need to make. Like at Lob, our SDRs only needed to make about 30 to 40 calls per day, because our conversion rates were around 3 to 4%. So it enabled us to make less calls, and our average deal size was high enough to the point where if the SDRs hit the right customers, they could make less dials. If they chose to hit smaller customers, they would need to make more dials. They would need to make more like 60 or 70 dials a day. So it all depends again on who you're calling and kind of what guardrails you put out. But ultimately, you do need to lean more on the sales enablement, because to me, your SDR team is the tip of your spear on both your talent acquisition and on your pipeline. If you are going to be able to promote from within, you need to hire the right people, and you need to enable those people to get to the AE level. And that's kind of one side of it. The second side of it, which is probably the side that a lot of companies are struggling with right now, is the unit economics of BDR teams have really changed over the past 5 years. When I was a BDR leader at WalkMe, we could have a BDR organization of 40 to 45 BDRs with multiple layers of leadership, and we could still have unit economics of, $4 of revenue generated for every $1 spent. Nowadays, that is really, really hard. And only the very best companies are actually able to do that. Most companies have opted to do outsourced BDRs. And what I've seen is if you find the right outsourced BDR company, you can still have really strong unit economics. That's actually what we did at Pipefy. We offshored it. We had people in Brazil, and that's what created such a strong unit economics for our BDR team. But if you want a strong unit economics and you don't want to W-2 people, if you're not able to hire full-time, outside of, call it North America, there are a lot of really great companies that you can outsource BDRs to that will get you good returns. I've worked with a few outsourced BDR companies that are just awful and have actually gotten us negative returns. But I've also worked with companies in the past that have gotten us great returns and have had strong unit economics. So just understanding what that looks like, at Pipefy, we had a very large in-house SDR team of about 25 SDRs, but we also outsourced some SDR work.
It was a hybrid.
It was hybrid. So we did a little bit of both. And we actually did a pilot with 2 outsourced SDR companies. One was about as bad as it could possibly be. I mean, we started working with them in March. I think they got their first meeting for us at the end of June. And it was not a good meeting. And I think it actually canceled. But the other company that we worked with was fantastic. I mean, literally not a day would go by without them booking 2 to 3 meetings for us. I mean, it was like clockwork. And so that's one where, I would look at them and say, hey, like I would 100% work with them again. So I think for SDR leaders today, it's just understanding and being willing to be flexible on what that model looks like. And then on top of that, recognizing that if you are going to go with an outsourced model, it doesn't mean that you can just ignore professional development. You are still going to have to hire and promote SDRs into account executives because that's ultimately what drives brand loyalty. It also, your best strategic account executives are not going to be hired from the outside. They're going to be built from within. And that's going to start at the SDR, BDR level. The very best strategic AEs that I've ever worked with are people that have been in seat at their company for 7, 8, 10 years and have just risen through the ranks and have gone from an SDR to an AE with a, $2-3 million quota, and that's selling to the Fortune 10, Fortune 5.
I assume you've been a part of some of the hiring processes for these SDRs at some of these companies. What are some of the things that stand out or that you look for when you're trying to bring someone on that you're thinking down the road, okay, this SDR not only will kick butt in the SDR role, but could likely grow into and be promoted into an AE role? What are some characteristics that you look for?
I think first is determination and hustle. There are some things that you just can't teach, and both of those fall into that. I want to see somebody that is just willing to run through a wall, because in the SDR role, you kind of have to. You are going to get hit with so many walls, and you are going to have to find a way to generate pipeline anyway. There's going to need to be a willingness to overcome adversity or kind of that determination, but there's also going to need to be just that sheer hustle factor. So I think first and foremost, I want to find things I can't teach. The second piece of that is creativity. I can probably teach some creativity, but really, I haven't done this on a day-to-day basis in many years. And quite honestly, the work that I did is fairly outdated. You called it out at the start of the pod, where I'm dialing on a manual phone with one piece of technology, which was Microsoft Dynamics. That was it. There was no such thing as like big, expansive tech stacks when I was an ISR. Nowadays, you need to learn how to work with 6 to 10 different pieces of technology, and you need to learn how all of them speak with each other. And it's just a very different game now than it was when I was cold calling. When I was cold calling, I could make 120 cold calls a day and know fairly definitively that even on a bad day, I would speak to 5 people. Now, you could speak to 5 people out of 100 cold calls on a great day. So you are going to need kind of that technology. So someone that is able to get creative with booking meetings and understanding how to leverage social media, and also understanding how to play the long game of building relationships and finding your way into warmer leads, that takes creativity. So, if we kind of go back, we've got hustle, determination. I would kind of group that into number 1. Creativity is number 2. And for me, it's always coachability is number 3. Because, teams that I lead, I'm going to make very intentional investments into coaching, enablement, personal and professional development. And if I'm going to make those investments, I need to know that you are going to be willing to not only listen to those investments, but learn from it and then put that into play. And I've had experiences where I've had amazing SDRs who I loved working with, who are genuinely great people, but did not adopt enough of the coaching fast enough when they were promoted to AEs. And they just didn't work out at the AE level because too often they were either not adapting to it, not receptive to it, or weren't willing to try it. That's one thing that I'm fairly non-compromising on, which is if I'm going to put the investment and time into building out personal and professional developments like BDR to AE certifications, like promoting from within, like, hiring specific leaders for these layered jobs like an SDR manager role, I need to see that you are willing and able to apply the coaching. If you can, I will continue to pour resources into you. If you can't, unfortunately, you just may not be the right fit for our program.
I agree with all your points, and the experienced reps oftentimes are great, but sometimes what happens is they think they know a lot, and so they're not willing to listen to your coaching because they think they've done it well in the past, and so it can sometimes be a blocker. That's what I've noticed. So sometimes when you get someone that's raw, they can learn right away rather than someone that's good. May not have to teach them as much, but it's almost harder for them to unlearn, to relearn. That's what I found when it comes specifically to the people that are tougher to coach and actually have them implement.
I think both of those are spot on. I would add, I think people get concerned and get defensive sometimes when you offer coaching. And sometimes, just that, at least for me, what I try to do is help people understand like, hey, like I'm not attacking you. I'm not saying you're bad. I'm just trying to raise your ability and raise our standard internally. And a lot of times I'll give coaching to people and people may already be good. And sometimes I'm just more interested in how they're going to react to when I give them coaching. Sometimes it's super small things, but I just want to kind of like test them and poke them to see if they're willing and able to learn from the coaching and dig into why I'm coaching them there.
Last question, and this is talked about a lot. I just wanted to get your take. So a lot of people are talking about AI. There's AI SDRs. There's AIs built into a lot of these tools, such as some of the dialers. How are you using AI specifically with SDRs to make their job easier or make them more efficient? Is there any specific tools or any ways you're incorporating it?
Let me lead this answer off by saying that I have evaluated about 16 different AI tools in the last 2 months that would fall into the AI SDR category. I left all 16 of those demos with fairly strong conviction that each of those tools is not ready for high utilization commercial use. The way that I believe we can help SDRs, and I think the best tool on the market today is ZoomInfo's Copilot. I think a way to help SDRs automate their prospecting, find the right people in the account immediately, and give a short blurb on why those people are potentially critical stakeholders is the best way that I see right now for us to help automate the SDR job. A lot of the outreach today, whether it's AI generated, it is AI written and then human edited, or it is AI coached, all sounds pretty much the same. And I don't know if you've kind of felt this way, but AI has kind of a certain way to write.
You can pick it out pretty easily.
Yeah, you really can. And it's just not for me. I'm sure other people would look at it and say like, oh, this applies to me. But I find when people use AI writing to try to sell to me, I often don't understand the value proposition and I leave uninterested in further exploration. Typically I need to make quick decisions on whether or not something is worth my time. And unless I leave something saying, yes, this is absolutely worth my time, I'm going to default to no, which is, I think, how most people operate. And I find almost every single piece of AI outreach I get leaves me feeling like the outreach is vague. And if there's vague outreach, to me, I find it's just an attempt to get on my calendar, and therefore it's not worth my time.
I can't unsee the dash that AI uses a lot. I just, even if it's written by a human, I can't unsee it. Like okay, that was written by AI. It's too hard for me to get around now because I know that's how AI writes. One thing that we have found as me running an SDR organization is the AI training environment. So these bots that you can add scripts to and give it certain, hey, be, on a scale of 1 to 10, be more rude, more difficult and whatnot. And so you allow the reps to get in additional calls and training and try to get the pitch down a little bit better and allow them to do that behind closed doors. And so they can practice on their own. It has been really helpful, especially in our space where we're working with a lot of different clients. But otherwise, the only other option is that you're doing it live. And I just found that is one use case that has been really helpful for us.
I think AI coaching is probably going to be one of the two best use cases for AI in sales for a long time. I think everybody wants to see AI applied to kind of like replace salespeople. I just have a hard time with that. There is so much complexity. Really, once you get to like even large SMB or like small mid-market sales and above, for small transactional SMB stuff, you don't need a salesperson already. And you didn't need a salesperson even like 4 years ago. I mean, that's where product-led growth can impact that. I think that AI coaching is a really good place for AI in sales.
Well, Josh, I'm going to wrap up the conversation, although I do feel like we can go for another 30 minutes. Where can people find you if they have questions, they want to learn more about you, they want to hire you? Where's the best place for people to find you?
Josh Roth on LinkedIn. Feel free to shoot me a connection. I'm on LinkedIn consistently, although the amount of posting that I do on LinkedIn has declined as I've gotten a little bit busier, but still I'm on LinkedIn a lot. I love to comment, love to send people messages. So feel free to shoot me a connection there.
All right. Thanks for coming on the show, Josh. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.